Well, good morning, gang, and welcome again to another morning coffee and a thought brought to you by Wings of Faith Ministries here in Sarnia, Ontario. Great to be with you this morning. I've got my coffee here. I hope you have yours. This morning, I want to go way back in Israel's story. Actually, Israel's not even a nation yet. They're just a family. So we're going back almost to 2000 BCE, where we want to look at the story. Actually, it's a very tragic story of that first family, the story of Lot and all that happened to him. We want to glean from that story and find the relevance that it would have for us today. So we're going to travel back in time there in just a minute, but first of all, I want to remind you that Morning Coffee and a Thought can be seen here on our YouTube channel every Friday beginning at 1 p.m. in the afternoon and also at 9 a.m. on our Facebook page on Sunday mornings. Also, we want to remind you that Journey of Insight, a program in which Al and I are looking at the foundational truths of the Christian faith, can be seen on Wednesday mornings on our YouTube channel beginning at 10 a.m. Also, if you want any information, if you have a prayer request or you want to make a donation to our ministry, you can do all of that at wingsoffaithministries.ca. Just reach out to us at the website. All right, let's get back to our thought. As I said, we're going way back in history. Abram, before he became Abraham, lived in Ur of the Chaldees in Mesopotamia. It'd be modern day Iraq. He and his family end up moving from there. Abraham gets a call from God, from the Hebrew God Yahweh, to move westward from Mesopotamia to Canaan. Now he will do this in 2 stages. But before he leaves Mesopotamia, his brother Haran will die. And so he adopts Haran's son, Lot, his nephew, and takes him with him on this journey to Canaan. Now, the journey will go in 2 stages. They'll travel 600 miles northwest to the town of Haran, different Hebrew spelling. And then from that community, they will travel 400 miles southwest until they reach the southern end of Canaan. Now, when the family gets there, there's going to be a famine. And that famine will force Abraham, his wife Sarah, and Lot into the land of Egypt. Now, we're not told how long that they live in Egypt, but there's a dispute with Pharaoh, and they end up leaving Egypt and coming back to the southern part of the land of Canaan. Now, as we said, there's not a lot of detail of what happened to Egypt other than the dispute with Abraham's wife Sarah, but we know they came out of Egypt very wealthy. The scriptures tell us that both Abraham and Lot had a lot of livestock, silver, and gold. And so here they are on the southern end of Canaan, but they're not the only ones there. There are other tribes living there at the time. And pretty soon, land and wells are going to become an issue. Remember the type of society they would have lived in back then, especially as nomadic tribesmen. Land and wells were what was important. So by Genesis 13, we realize that the land is not sustainable for both the flocks of Abraham and Lot. And so they meet together in Genesis chapter 13 to kind of work out this issue. Now, the story of Lot actually begins back in Genesis 11. It will run through to Genesis 14, and then Lot will come back up again in Genesis 19. But this meeting that they have is very important. So Abraham says to Lot, we got to separate here. The land can't sustain the both of us. You choose where you want to go, and I'll go in the opposite direction. So Lot knows that the plains of the Jordan, that area around the southern Jordan River, the beginning of the Dead Sea, is well watered. It's very fertile. And so he decides he's going to move his flocks, his family in tents in that direction. As the scriptures say, the land heading towards Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham will head more to the north. He will head to Hebron. And so the next few chapters are going to go in different directions. Then we find out in Genesis chapter 14 that a turf war takes place after both have separated and settled. This turf war will bring about a man by the name of Chedorlaomer. He is aligned with 4 other kings who live in the far east of the Jordan River. But in this turf war they take control of the whole area around the eastern part of the Jordan River and the eastern part of the Dead Sea, including Sodom and Gomorrah and some other communities around them. Now this goes on for about 12 years, until finally 5 kings, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, will rebel against Chedorlaomer. A battle takes place on the east side of the Dead Sea. Chedorlaomer prevails, and we find out that all that area is plundered. Now here's the interesting thing. By the time this battle takes place, Lot is no longer herding cattle and livestock. He's now a resident of the city of Sodom. Interesting. So he is captured, his family's captured by Chedorlaomer, and they head up about 150 miles north along the east side of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. Abraham, because of a messenger, finds out about all this, and he and his neighbors get together, get about 318 men, and they head up hoping to rescue Lot and the family from their captors. The rescue is successful, and Lot is brought back to his community. Now, I don't know about you, but I would think that this would be kind of some red flags if I was Lot. Maybe my decision-making hasn't been the best. Now, Lot has been driven mainly by his motivation for what's good for me. That's why he settled in the Jordan River Valley, and that's why he probably ended up in Sodom. And this turf war that he's just been rescued from, obviously he hasn't learned. And so he goes right back living in Sodom. Abraham will return to where he's living. In Genesis chapter 18, Abraham is visited by 3 angels. And at the end of the visit, the angels tell him that the area of Sodom and Gomorrah has now become a target of judgment. That the lifestyle, the sin, the culture of that area has become so offensive to God that they're now targets for judgment. Abraham begins to try to negotiate with the angel over the destruction of Sodom. How many righteous people would it take to stave off judgment? The conclusion of all this is really not going to matter. Judgment's going to happen. We find out that 2 of the angels now head to Sodom to rescue Lot. When they approach Sodom, and this is very important, they see Lot at the city gates. Now that wouldn't mean a lot to us as we're reading the text, But when you study ancient culture, you realize that this is a big, important fact. At the city gates of most cities back then was a strip of pavement. And in the strip of pavement, the city elders would sit, and that's where all the legal transactions would take place. City decisions would be made there by the elders of the community. So the fact that Lot was at the city gate tells us he was more than just a resident. He was now probably one of the elders of the city. He was totally embedded in the culture of Sodom. Quickly knowing who these angels or messengers might be, he gets them to come to his place. So we know he still knows how to show hospitality. He quickly gets them into his home because he doesn't really want them to see the culture of the city of Sodom. However, the residents of Sodom come to him, and we are told that they wanted to have sexual relations with the visitors. Well, that doesn't go very well, and the messengers, the divine messengers, blind the residents, so they lose their way. The next morning, the people of the residence get up, the messengers, Lot, his wife, and the two daughters. And the messengers are now telling them, look, if you've got people here that are connected to you, you better warn them judgment's coming, you've got to get out of here. What I find amazing is the resistance to the angels. Lot and his family really don't want to leave, even though they're being warned that this city is a target for judgment. They are very, very reluctant. They have become so entrenched in the culture, the activities of the city, that they don't want to leave it. We see in the scriptures they're practically forced to leave it. The daughters have to leave without the two men they were going to be married to, and the angels basically have to drag them out of town. Lot makes a deal with them that he doesn't want to go too far away from Sodom. He asks if he can settle in a nearby community, and his request is granted. The cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, the surrounding towns, will end up being destroyed. There's all sorts of theories, be it a sulfur explosion as a reaction to lightning. Some have said it looks like a meteor, a small meteor, hit at the south end of the Dead Sea. Either way, that area was destroyed. Lot survives, but without his wife, who was very slow in coming out of the city and ended up becoming a victim of the destruction of those cities. And Lot barely escapes with his two daughters, and they end up living in a cave. That is where his life ends. So what can we today learn from this? I think first of all we have to look at Lot's decision making. It was not based on any type of morality, no type of real righteous way of living. His decision making was totally motivated by what was best for him at that time. Both when he left Abraham to live in the Jordan River Valley, in the plain there by the north part of the Dead Sea, and then later when he kind of leaves the land altogether and becomes a resident, and it looks like a community leader in Sodom. Jewish rabbis have looked at Lot kind of in two different veins. Some have seen him as basically a man that was out for himself and ended up paying the price for his decision making. Others, and 2 Peter follows this line, that Lot was a righteous man, but still was willing to live in an environment like Sodom and Gomorrah because it benefited him personally. Whatever track we take, it ends in disaster and demise for Lot and his family. He will end up living in a cave, having sex with his two daughters to prolong their family line, and those lines will end up being nations that become enemies of the nation of Israel. A sad ending to his life. What we take from this is decision making in our lives are very important. Do we base it on our relationship with God, or do we base it on what we think is best for us at the time? The second way of decision making, what's best for us, can lead us in some bad paths. It can entrap us in the world around us, and we can become so entrenched in it that even the divine has a hard time removing us from what's around us. We get sucked in to the culture, the lifestyle, the decision making, and the activities of those who really could be called Antichrist, who are far from God. And we find ourselves among them because somewhere along the line we thought it might benefit us. Lot missed all the red flags. He was blinded to them because he thought living in Sodom was a benefit to him. And in the end, it devastated his life. Decision making in our lives has to be based on our relationship with Christ. It's too easy in this life to get me-centered and start making decisions on a me-centered basis. But it only leads down the road to a destructive end. Lot is a wonderful warning story for us in how we make our decisions in life. Listen, enjoy your coffee, and we'll see you again next week.